lines, sorting through the media bias, exposing the propaganda, and challenging you to use your brain. It's time to tap into the truth.
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed time to tap into the truth. With you, as always, this is your host, Tim Tapp, coming to you live from historic Roane County, Tennessee. And today we're talking about, of course, what everybody else is talking about, the verdict in the George Zimmerman trial. As it comes down, I was really shocked that we had a verdict before the end of the weekend. I was thinking probably Monday or Tuesday, just because there was so much pressure on these ladies, in so much as having to watch out for not only trying to do their job, but it had to be weighing on their minds and their hearts heavily what the consequences would be of doing their job in this case. And their job in this case was to do everything they could to see that justice was done, which means that they had to follow the law, follow the letter of the law, in determining justice not just for Trayvon Martin, but for George Zimmerman too. Our court system is set up specifically to stack the deck on behalf of the accused. The state has to prove its case. And as frustrating as that can be sometimes for folks, when you see people that you just know in your heart and mind are as guilty as sin, the framers set it up that way for the express purpose of making sure that you couldn't be falsely accused and easily sent away. And I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, if it's you sitting in that defendant's chair, if it's a spouse, if it's a parent, if it's your son or your daughter, you're going to be happy that that's the case in that situation. This jury, no matter how you feel about or whose side you took in this case, this jury did its job. And for our legal system, and as far as it's concerned, justice was served. And it wasn't just justice for one person or justice for another. It was justice for everyone. But more importantly, it was justice for everyone else that didn't stand accused in this, because it means that despite the best efforts of certain rabble-risers and the crowd mentality and the mob rule, that our judicial system still stands up against that headwind and says, we have laws here, we have rules, and we have a job that when we sit here as jurors, we have to deliberate based on what we heard, what we saw in court, and what this means according to the law. Not, how do I feel about this? Not, how does that angry mob of protesters outside the courtroom with signs feel about this? I applaud these ladies because they stood up against that headwind. They faced what had to be scary, that knowing that there's been threats of repercussions against these women should they find the wrong way from the beginning. But they still did their jobs. And based on the evidence that was presented in court, there was no choice but to find George Zimmerman not guilty. And it's an important distinction there, too, because, again, I've said several times, I wasn't going to do a show on the Zimmerman trial once it started until it was finished. Well, it was finished officially as of yesterday evening. And I came within a hair of going ahead and doing a late-night broadcast once I heard the news. Because I was excited, not that it came back not guilty, but because these jurors had every opportunity to compromise, play fast and loose with the rules. The way most liberals like to do. But they took their job seriously, and they followed the rules, they followed the law, and they did the only thing they could have. They brought back a not guilty verdict. And the reason I keep saying that is because, ladies and gentlemen, again, no matter how you feel about this case, no matter whose camp you were in, if you're one of these highly activist people in this, the rule of law is still supposed to be what takes precedent in that courtroom. Trayvon Martin should not be dead. He shouldn't be. But Trayvon Martin should not have circled back and attacked George Zimmerman if that's what happened. And I keep saying that just because I wasn't there. I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. I know that that's what's been testified, and I know that most of the evidence that was presented supports that story. I also know that in that similar situation, most people, if they stood accused of this particular crime, might exaggerate some of what happened. Certainly would be inclined to maybe leave out bits and pieces that they felt like they did wrong. But the way the law is in most states, George Zimmerman could have confronted him and got right up in his face, and they could have been shouting back and forth with spittle getting in his face, and there's still nothing that has been crossed legally until that first punch is thrown. Is this over? Obviously not. I mean, you've already got the NAACP demanding civil rights charges be brought against Zimmerman, although I have yet to see exactly what civil right has been violated in particular, because aside from NBC's attempt to edit the 911 call that Zimmerman placed when he was reporting to the police that he saw Mr. Martin walking through the neighborhood, their doctoring of that tape, making it sound like he was being racist at the time. Other than that piece of evidence, I don't see anything civil right oriented that belongs there. Harry Reid this morning on, I believe it was Face the Nation, telling everybody that, this isn't done. I'm sure the Justice Department will be looking into it. Somebody needs to be looking into the Justice Department right now to find out why the hell they spent U.S. taxpayer dollars on organizing and funding pro-Trayvon Martin rallies, anti-George Zimmerman rallies, just trying to stir the pot in this thing. That's not an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars. The Justice Department is supposed to be neutral when it comes to a case like this because it's not a federal case. If they're interested in justice, something tells me you'd have a whole different group of folks running it right now. Between gun walking into Mexico and claiming that journalists conducting an investigation makes you an accessory to whatever type of terrorist activity that justifies bugging AP reporters and Fox News reporters, criminalizing journalism. Well, seems like our Justice Department really doesn't understand what the term justice means. They have been spending a little too much time with their so-called progressive liberal professors, and they've allowed it to twist their minds into believing that the definition of justice has become social justice. And by the way, for anybody who wants to take the time, like I often say on this show, do your own research, use your brain, look it up. You'll find out that the term social justice is almost entirely interchangeable with socialism. Why? Because social justice isn't about justice at all. It's about an attempt to bring a equitable, using the term loosely, change to an inequitable previous status quo. What about standing up on your own merit? What about personal responsibility? What about making better choices? I tend to think Sean Hannity is probably on to a big chunk of what occurred on this night, if you're interested in that. I think most people that are all excited, positively or negatively, about the outcome of this trial or the fact that it even came to trial, really aren't interested in the specifics. They're really not interested in what happened. All they see was a white-looking guy who killed a black kid. And that's grounds to get everybody whipped up into a frenzy. Now, it doesn't matter in these people's minds what actually happened, but I think Hannity, who has said this several times, is probably pretty close to what happened, in so much as, here's Trayvon. He's not normally part of this neighborhood. He's visiting because the parents are divorced and separated. And, you know, it was raining. So maybe he was kind of staying a little closer to the houses than he should have. I don't know if there's any truth to the fact that he was peeking into the houses with the lights off. If that is the case, then I think Zimmerman is more than justified in following him through the freaking neighborhood. As far as I can tell, based on the evidence that has been provided, and again, I keep going back to the evidence because that's what you have to consider. Your passion, your feelings of anger and hate and resentment and racism, no matter what side of the argument you're on, none of that matters in the courtroom. And you're not going to solve anything or make things any different by letting that rule you when it comes to looking at this case. If you want to let the outcome motivate you to making positive changes towards laws in the state, then have at it. But threats of violence are only going to make things worse. Acting out, protesting, well, utilize your free speech, but keep it in check, boys and girls. Let's not get crazy. Let's not get yourselves in trouble for something that may very well be exactly what George Zimmerman said. I mean, that thought process doesn't seem to have occurred to very many people who are trying to gin up activist activity. Is there still racism in America? Well, yeah, obviously, there must be. Is George Zimmerman a racist? I don't know his heart, I don't know his mind. But based on his history and the things he's done in the past, it certainly doesn't look like he's a racist. He mentored other minority children. He himself is Hispanic. He's half white, half Hispanic. That man is no more white than the occupier in the White House is. And you guys are all about him, right? All you liberals, you're all, woo, he's the first black president in history. Although I thought y'all kept saying Clinton was. And for the record, when I say y'all, I'm talking about liberal Democrats, okay? See, I don't think racially, so I catch myself, oh, yeah, that might be misconstrued there. So I'm not walking back from it. That's how I talk. I'm from the South. Y'all is something I say. I try not to sound so terribly Southern on the show. Not necessarily out of habit, but just because I tend to be a communicator. And I do a lot of different voices and a lot of different accents for fun and some of the things I do on the side. Bottom line is, though, I am still Southern, and as a Southerner, sometimes I talk a little Southern. So if you hear me say y'all and y'all folks, I'm talking about everybody. Anyway, I'm going to digress from that point and get back onto the topic. There's some very suspicious things that have went on from the very beginning of this trial. We have one person who has not received any justice from this case, and that is the former police chief of Stanford. Stanford, Florida, had a police chief who stood up and made a stand based on law and order, and he said, look, here, we don't have enough evidence to charge him. It wasn't even about the stand your ground law in Florida, which early on a lot of liberals tried to make hay on that and said, see, we shouldn't have a stand your ground law in any state. This is what happens. But keep in mind, folks, these same liberals are the one who wants to take all your guns away from you and make sure you don't have the right to stand up against a criminal. They want to make sure that you just go call the police. And how long did it take for the police to arrive here in this case, folks? Let's think about that. George Zimmerman called 911. He walked around. He got a freaking street address. He was answering questions. He was on the phone with these police officers for how long? And how long was it before the cops actually showed up? Not until after other people placed 911 calls, because the fight had started. How much time actually passed between the time Zimmerman first called 911 and the time the other 911 calls passed? I don't have that right off. I forgot how much. I did look at it, and I think it's an important point. And that leads back to the point of, if you can wait for the police to take care of this all the time, chances are there's going to be a lot more crime and a lot fewer survivable victims. Let me say this again because this is important. Trayvon Martin should not be dead. I don't dispute that. I agree with that. He should not be. But here's what I don't know, and what I'm guessing the overwhelming majority of you people don't know. Whose fault is it that he's dead? Yeah, it's real easy to say, oh, it's Zimmerman's. He's the one who shot him. It's also real easy if you're in the pro-Zimmerman camp to say, well, it's Trayvon's because he shouldn't have attacked him. But we don't know what happened in those moments in between. Our judicial system seeks to provide justice based on evidence. And there just wasn't any evidence that suggested that this wasn't a case of self-defense on the part of George Zimmerman. I think, as I've already said, that Hannity was on to part of what happened here. A tragic misunderstanding between the two. Zimmerman starts following him because he doesn't know this Martin kid. He knows he's not ordinarily part of this neighborhood. He knows there's been a lot of criminal activity going on, and as part of the neighborhood watch, it's his job, although it's a voluntary one, he still took the responsibility, and he took it seriously. So it's his job to call 911. It's his job to see that this report is made. Now, the one thing Zimmerman did wrong, he broke community watch, neighborhood watch rules. He was carrying his legally permitted firearm with him. He's not supposed to do that. And I understand why that rule is there, too. It's an important rule. It is designed to help prevent a helpful neighborhood organization that keeps an eye on the neighborhood, helps keep crime down, aids the police in preventing crime. It helps keep these people from becoming a friendly neighborhood group of vigilantes. You don't want somebody carrying firearms to these things because, well, stuff like what happened can happen. You know, I was looking at some statistics the other day, and there's a high percentage of shootings where the people who got shot were shot with their own gun, the gun they brought to the party that they had taken away from them. It's a high percentage. It happens to police officers. It happens to everyday citizens that are defending their homes. It happens to a lot of people. Now, again, I saw this and I meant to have this printed off, but I'm looking here through my wonderful stack. Yes, Rush Limbaugh is not the only one who has a stack of stuff. And I can't find it. I should have had it at the top, so I apologize. But, you know, again, don't take my word for it. Don't sit here and take the statistics that I find. Go ahead and look it up for yourself. Use your brain, people, because at the end of the day, as divided and as racially heated as this has become, this should have never been about race. It becomes a little bit because, again, like I said, Hannity's onto part of it. The part he's not onto is I definitely see this being a case where Trayvon didn't know what this guy was doing either. And in the neighborhood that he does come from, he's got to represent. He's got to get back up in this guy's grill. He's got to be a man, or at least what passes for a man in some of these neighborhoods. What the jury wasn't allowed to hear is that Trayvon has a spotty history. Now, how much of that is important? Well, strictly legally speaking, not necessarily any of it. But if it does lead to showing a pattern of a certain mentality where Trayvon does indeed have to get back up at this guy and has to beat him down because he feels threatened or challenged, then maybe it is important. Now, again, I don't know what happened, and that is just speculation, and I freely admit that's speculation, and you can speculate it another way. I can sit here and speculate the one and only way that George Zimmerman is legally guilty of second-degree murder, or even manslaughter in this particular case. The one way that he is if he physically got in Trayvon's way and prevented him from going on. If he physically stepped up and stopped him, then it's a case where Trayvon is defending himself when the physicality of this fight starts. That's the only way. Now, again, if you don't like that, I'm sorry, but that's the way the law reads in the state of Florida, and this particular for manslaughter, for murder 1, 2, or 3, regardless of what you do. You know, the instant you can institute the reasonable doubt of self-defense, then it's over. It's done. You can't be guilty of murdering someone if you're defending yourself. If Zimmerman did not do what was said, and keep in mind, none of the evidence supports this theory, but it's still possible. I mean, if we're going to sit here and speculate, it is possible. And again, I keep saying, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. And that's what I want you to realize. I want you to recognize. If you were there, if you did see this, then why the hell didn't you stand up and testify? If you know something, you should have testified. But the point is, as far as I can tell, there's only 2 people who know what actually happened. One of them's dead, and the other one just got acquitted. Now, it is a horrific tragedy to lose a child under any circumstances. But everything that happened in this case that can be proven, that can be quantified, supports Zimmerman's story of self-defense. So all I'm saying here is, folks, is if you are pro-Trayvon, if you're justice for Trayvon, and you're heavy into that, you know, if you're in that camp, keep in mind the jurors did not betray you or Trayvon or any principles. The jurors stood up for the principles of law and order. It's not the jurors' fault. They weren't given an option, because if you had been on that jury and you set those personal feelings aside and actually did the job the way you're supposed to, based on the evidence that was presented, you didn't have a choice. In fact, the only reason these ladies deliberated as long as they did is because they wanted to be certain that the lesser charge of manslaughter wasn't still a possible verdict. If it had been left at, okay, you can only consider murder 2, they may have only been out for 30 minutes 45 minutes, an hour, because the state failed miserably to set their case. Now, miserably they failed. In fact, the prosecution did more to help Zimmerman than they did to hurt him. Before you get all riled up and want to go out and protest or want to go out and riot, have you even looked at the evidence? Have you saw what the testimony was? That's kind of important. Don't be mad at the jurors. They did their job. The people who didn't do their job were the prosecutors. And get this, here's where we kind of squeak over to the conspiracy theory corner, because my conspiracy theory antenna kind of comes up. The prosecution did such a piss poor job in this case that I wonder if maybe they didn't want riots. Part of me wonders if maybe this wasn't part of the plan. Maybe even as high up as the White House, where the occupier was thinking, if we can get race riots going, woohoo, here's my chance to declare martial law. And if I do it early enough, then nobody thinks twice about it being convenient that it's happening closer to an election time. I could just suspend the elections. That is part of the authority of the executive branch while things are under martial law. Here, all I'm saying is don't be a useful idiot. Understand that if the government in this case was really trying to do the job of providing justice, and you honestly believe Trayvon was completely innocent in this, then they should have waited to make an arrest. They should have waited till they built their case. And they should have done a better job of building their case. Justice was served here. The evidence was heard. All the evidence that they had. They didn't have enough evidence to get a conviction. The police chief knew that right away. He got fired for standing up for that. The prosecutors initially, no interest in it. Ask yourself this question. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the indictment process, but in most states, I'm surprised that it's not the case in Florida, but in most states, you cannot bring a murder case to trial. In fact, a lot of capital offense crimes you can't bring to trial without an indictment. That means you have to have the grand jury listen to everything the state has. I mean, it's strictly almost 100%. This is the prosecutor. This is what we have. This is what we have. This is what we have. Tell me, do I have enough that we can take this to trial? The defense doesn't really get much of a chance to defend during that state. All you get to hear is one-sided, all this, prosecution, prosecution, prosecution. There's a reason why, in this case, they skipped that. I'm trying to get a hold of a lawyer from Florida, because every lawyer I've talked to about this to this point has said, well, I'm just not that familiar with that part of the Florida code, so I don't know. I'm trying to find out if it was even legal to bring this up, because, like I said, in most states, you can't bring murder charges to trial without a grand jury indictment. That was skipped here. I would like to know what the federal government, what the Justice Department was doing, spending taxpayer dollars paying for, organizing, creating, busing people in for anti-Zimmerman rallies before things got started. It's not the proper role for the Justice Department, and it's not a proper use of taxpayer dollars. Somebody needs to be looking into that. I think I may have said that already. But it's still true. It is unrealistic to believe that this is over, because the federal government, for whatever reason, has decided to inject itself into it. The NAACP is demanding civil rights charges. The Justice Department has basically got walking orders from every Democrat in the Senate. Harry Reid's practically said as much. Let's take another look into it. So, yeah, this is going to be their attempt. But, ultimately, I do believe the Martins, that Trayvon Martin's family has a legitimate grounds, because for a civil suit. And the reason I say that is because the levels necessary to make your case, the standards that you have to hit, are different. And I think they can legitimately make the case that George Zimmerman, by violating neighborhood watch policies, he didn't break a law by doing it. A lot of people seem to want to say that he broke the law by bringing his gun on his patrol. He broke neighborhood watch policies. There is no law against him carrying a legally permitted carried concealed weapon. No law against it. He did it legally. He had it legally. It was his gun. But because, again, the standards are lower for a wrongful death suit in civil court, and the fact that he knowingly violated policy, you've got criminal negligence and you've got wrongful death. And I think they can win that. And I think that's where it should be left at. I think it should be up to them to pursue that if they're so inclined. But the Justice Department needs to stay out of it. The NAACP needs to stay out of it, because this is not a race issue, and it should not be a race issue. And we'll get into that right after we take this quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Tap into the truth. Check us out at tapintothetruth.com for our latest blog posts and for links to all of our past broadcasts. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. That's Tap Into the Truth, right here on Spreaker Radio. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Do please follow the show here. We are still running the contest for new followers. Get a nice little prize pack. We'll have a drawing at the end of the month, which is coming quickly. By the way, TY Capitalism has not yet stepped up to claim his prize pack for the month of June. So if you're listening, TY Capitalism, please, we need that contact information so we can send you your prize pack. Kinda need your address before we can send you anything. Of course, if we don't hear back from you by the time for us to have the drawing for July, we may just go ahead and redraw and hand out two prize packs, one for the previous one. I am still trying to get a hold of you, however. TY Capitalism, you are the winner. I'm trying hard to get a hold of you. Okay, I've sent messages over on Blog Talk. And speaking of Blog Talk, let me go ahead and ask you to check out today's broadcast that was over there. We did that at 3 p.m. today. I was joined by Dr. Sharon Schutz. She's currently actively working as one of the primary, well, not one of the primaries, but currently very actively working as a contributor to the Lady Patriots website, and she's also started taking on certain administration type responsibilities with a new conservative social media site called patriotspace.com. I'd like to invite some of y'all to go over there and check it out. I have already become a member there, and I've got to tell you, it's It reminds me from Form and Phil a lot of TeaPartyCommunity.com, but they started it there partially because of today's topic over on Blog Talk, which was social media versus conservatives. And it has a lot to do focusing primarily on Facebook, but there has been a lot of social media websites that have shown a huge bias against conservative viewpoints. And while that's going on, she had her fourth article in a series of articles on that topic recently released and recently on the Lady Patriot site. So let me recommend that you look up Tap Into the Truth on Blog Talk. Check out that show. It was only 30 minutes today. Talked to her for about 18 minutes or so. And then also had a little bit talk about the George Zimmerman verdict there as well. So I don't say the same things, even though sometimes I have the same title for the shows here and over there. They're not identical. We cover a lot of the same material, though. So we get to that point in the show, you may not want to continue listening, or you might want to. I'll reiterate here some of the points. Because like I said, some of the points I'll make there are not going to get hit over here. Had nobody call in after the fact, which was a little disappointing, because I really want to get some input on some folks and what they think about the Zimmerman verdict in particular. I know there's a lot of it. I got to tell you, being on Twitter last night when I was trying to promote today's show, even though I was only on for a few minutes, there was just unreal the amount of anger and hatred. But the whole point is that this should have never been about race in the first place. George Zimmerman should be filing a defamation of character lawsuit against NBC. And quite honestly, the Justice Department, instead of looking into possible civil rights violations that Zimmerman did to Trayvon, need to be looking at the criminal negligence in the fake journalism that NBC did in trying to edit the 911 call. They intentionally tried to make Zimmerman sound racist. They edited it that way on purpose. George Zimmerman is a man who volunteered and mentored other minority kids in the neighborhood. He's a man who wanted to become a law enforcement officer. He's a man who wanted to protect his neighborhood from crime. All of this is documented, and it is not a matter of opinion or speculation. There's evidence of this. There is proof. So there is no proof that Zimmerman was racially motivated in wanting to kill Trayvon. Oh, here's some black kid going through my neighborhood. I need to shoot him. It wasn't like that. If it was, he would have never called 911 in the first place. This was not about race. It's been spun into that. It's spun out of control that way. There's a ton of folks that believe they're completely justified to want to go running through some cracker neighborhoods and kill some cracker babies. I get so angry when I hear people make statements about that, make statements like that, because number one, it shows their ignorance, and number two, it further drives a wedge between communities that there should not be a wedge drove between. You are not African American. You are American. The definition of racism seems to have been twisted also, again, by the so-called progressives in attempting to create an air of social justice. To think that it's only racism if it's institutional racism. Black people can't possibly be racist. I heard some lady on a YouTube video earlier as I was perusing through them to do show prep for the earlier show. Black people can't be racist. We don't own any banks. We don't own anything, blah, blah, blah. We can't hold you down or hold you back. Well, guess what, lady? Most of the white people that you're going to see and know, they don't own any banks either. It's those crafty little so-called progressives that own a lot of that stuff. Don't let some misguided concept of your need for social justice to get you all twisted up, because, like it or not, believe it or not, there is only one thing that really is true when it comes to race relations in America. Racism can be redefined any way you want to try to redefine it, but the bottom line is the true definition of racism. It means that you believe in the superiority of your race, either physically or morally or whatever, maybe even all of the above. Or, see, it's not excluded to an and or. It can be both. It can just be one or the other. Or you have an irrational mistrust or dislike of people of another ethnic background, race, or religion based solely on the fact that you do not share the same. So guess what? Regardless of your socioeconomic level in society, you can be a racist. Being proud of your heritage is one thing, and that doesn't necessarily mean racism. Hatred of another group of people just because they're not part of your people, that is racism. And it doesn't matter if you can institutionalize that racism or not. If you express vitriol, and if you can create riots aimed to hurt people or property that belong to somebody outside of your group, that's an act of racism, institutionalized or otherwise. If you really want to make a change in race relations, it starts with letting go of the anger and the hurt of the past. There are people of every other color and creed in this country that will be willing to work with you to try and bring about real equality. But before you can let that happen, you've got to let go of the anger and the pain in your heart. Never forget the past, but let go of the anger and the hurt from that past. Because until you do that, you're just going to be an angry person. And an angry person cannot be reasoned with, and an angry person cannot reason with someone else. Going around talking about killing cracker babies, the only way you're going to have freedom is you go kill some white people. Stuff like that is not helpful to your cause. I understand anger and frustration. I understand feeling like you have been downtrodden. Believe me, I understand the feelings of frustration because of socioeconomics. I am by no means particularly well off myself, and I am struggling some months. Some months I'm doing a little better. I'm nowhere near where I was about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Had a job that paid a lot better then. Actually, about 5 years ago, now that I think about it. But I'm fortunate enough to still have a job, and it pays decent. And I'm still struggling. And I know not everybody has that same luxury. It's real easy to feel down, and it's human nature to want to blame everybody else. But in this particular case, we cannot blame everybody else, and we can't become useful idiots. This, for the folks at the national level, it's nothing but a distraction and another attempt to keep us separate, to keep us separated. Don't let them distract you, and don't let them drive a wedge between us, because in the end, if we want to keep our liberties and our freedoms and our Constitution in place, it's only going to happen by standing together as Americans. We let the racial divisions divide us. We let them do that and to keep us distracted so they can continue to do what it is they're doing right now to take our freedoms away. Then we've just fallen into their trap. Don't fall into that trap. Got about 30 seconds left, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. That was my 2 cents worth. Again, please check out today's broadcast over on Blog Talk, blogtalk.com. Look up Tap Into the Truth, same spelling as it is here. In the meanwhile, don't take my word for it. Definitely don't take their word for it. Take your time, do your own research, use your brain. That's what you've got it for. Everybody have a great weekend. And remember to always don't settle for the surface. Tap into the truth. Goodbye, everybody.